The night Teresa left me, the city was still awake, alive with lights and laughter, yet every sound felt like it was mocking me. She stood in the doorway of our apartment, suitcase in one hand, her phone in the other, the glow from the screen reflecting in her eyes more than I ever could. "I can't keep living like this, Marvin," she said, voice cold and final. "Harry can give me the life I deserve, you can't." The name hit me like a slow punch. Harry. I'd met him once, at a networking event. He was all sharp suits and louder than necessary laughter, the kind of man who shook hands while looking over your shoulder for someone more important. I remembered thinking he wasn't dangerous. I was wrong. That night I didn't beg her to stay. I didn't block the door or demand an explanation. I just watched as she stepped into the elevator without looking back. When the doors closed, it was like the last thread between us had been cut. For weeks, I barely slept. Work became my refuge, my punishment, and my weapon. Every hour I spent in the office was another brick in the wall I was building between the man I used to be and the man I was becoming. I refused to be defined by the woman who had traded me in for champagne brunches and rooftop parties. Paula entered my life quietly, almost like she'd been there all along. She worked in the same building, in a department that rarely crossed paths with mine. The first time we spoke, it wasn't about work, it was about a broken coffee machine in the break room. She made a joke, I laughed, and something in my chest loosened. She never asked about Teresa, but I saw in her eyes that she knew there was someone I was trying to forget. Months passed, and the company began to change with me. I secured clients that once thought we were too small to handle their accounts. I negotiated deals in boardrooms where my name had never been mentioned before. The more I achieved, the more I realized Teresa hadn't just left me, she had freed me. By the time the annual industry gala came around, I was unrecognizable from the man who had stood in that apartment doorway. My suit was tailored, my name carried weight, and Paula was by my side, her hand resting lightly on my arm as we moved through the crowd. She wasn't flashy. She didn't need to be. She spoke with quiet confidence, and people listened. I was mid-conversation with a potential investor when I saw her. Teresa. She was across the room, wearing a black silk gown that shimmered under the chandeliers. Her hair was styled the way it had been when we first met, and for a moment, it was as if no time had passed. But then I saw the way her eyes darted from face to face, scanning for someone more important, and I remembered exactly who she was. She noticed me almost instantly. Her lips parted in surprise before curling into a smile that looked rehearsed. She excused herself from the man she'd been speaking to and walked toward me like she owned the ground she stepped on. "Marvin," she breathed, stopping just close enough for her perfume to reach me. "It's been too long." I let the silence stretch for a moment before replying. "It has." She tilted her head, her gaze flicking briefly to Paula. "You look different." "I am," I said simply. Paula gave her a polite nod before excusing herself to speak with a colleague across the room. I could see Teresa's eyes following her, measuring her, trying to understand her place in my life. "She's pretty," Teresa said, her voice soft but edged. "She's more than that," I replied, my tone even. "She's steady, she's kind. She's the reason I remember what it's like to trust someone." Something flickered in Teresa's eyes, regret, maybe, or just the realization that the life she had chosen might not be as secure as she'd imagined. She glanced over her shoulder, and I followed her gaze to Harry. He was leaning close to another woman, his attention fixed entirely on her. Teresa's lips tightened before she turned back to me. "I've been meaning to call you," she said, her smile tightening. "I thought maybe we could talk, catch up." "I don't think that's a good idea," I told her. "The past doesn't need an audience." Her jaw tightened at the dismissal, but she tried to mask it with the laugh. "You've changed." "I had to," I said. "You made sure of that." For the first time since she'd walked up to me, she didn't have a ready response. She just stood there, her eyes flicking to Paula again, and I could almost see the calculations running through her mind. The woman she'd left behind had been a safety net she could step away from and return to whenever she pleased, but that man was gone. I excused myself before she could say anything else, walking toward Paula as if there was nothing behind me worth turning back for. Paula looked up as I approached, her smile genuine, warm, and real in a way Teresa's had never been. As we spoke, I caught a glimpse of Teresa in the reflection of the glass doors. She was still standing where I'd left her, watching, her expression unreadable. For the first time in a long time, I felt nothing at all. I've been told that time changes people, but the truth is, time only strips away the things we use to hide who we are. Before Teresa left, I was a man who still believed that love alone could hold two people together. I thought patience and loyalty could outlast ambition and temptation. I learned too late that I was wrong. I met Teresa 5 years ago, at a charity auction I had no business attending. My company was still struggling, and I was there only because a friend had offered me a ticket he didn't need. I remember standing in the corner, nursing a glass of water because I couldn't justify paying for overpriced wine, when she walked in. She was wearing a deep green dress that made her eyes seem brighter than the lights above the stage. Her laughter floated through the room like music, drawing people to her without effort. She wasn't wealthy, not yet, but she knew how to make people believe she belonged among them. She was magnetic. We spoke for the first time during the auction itself. She leaned over and whispered a sharp, witty comment about one of the bidders, and I nearly choked trying to stifle a laugh. That was Teresa's gift. She could pull you into her orbit with a single line. For months after that night, we were inseparable. She believed in my work when very few people did, and I believed in her dreams when she confessed them in the quiet hours of the morning. She wanted more than a comfortable life, she wanted the world to notice her. I told her I would help her get there. At the time, I didn't realize how dangerous that promise was. Harry entered our lives 2 years into our relationship. He was a client at first, one of those wealthy entrepreneurs whose reputation was built more on showmanship than substance. He had a knack for appearing in glossy magazines and at high-profile events. Teresa was fascinated by him from the start. She said it was because of his business insight, but I saw the way she studied the way he carried himself, the way he commanded attention without saying much at all. I didn't think much of it until the changes began. Teresa started attending events without me, saying it was better for networking if she went alone. She came home later and later, her perfume lingering in the air long after she had disappeared into the shower. I told myself I trusted her. I told myself she wouldn't trade what we had for something as hollow as wealth and attention. But the night she stood in our apartment doorway with that suitcase, I realized she already had. After she left, I spent weeks replaying every conversation, every argument, every quiet dinner where her eyes had been somewhere else. I thought about the nights I stayed up working while she was out at dinners I wasn't invited to. I remembered the subtle ways she made me feel smaller when she spoke about the people she met. It wasn't sudden, it had been happening all along, but I'd been too blinded by love to see it. Paula came into my life when I had stopped looking for anyone to fill the space Teresa had left behind. She was the opposite of Teresa in almost every way. Where Teresa's presence demanded attention, Paula's steadiness invited trust. She worked in public relations for a sister company, and our first real conversation wasn't about work at all, it was about an old typewriter I kept in my office. She'd seen it through the open door and stopped to ask if it still worked. It did, barely. I told her I kept it because it reminded me that some things could last if you cared for them properly. She smiled at that, not the polite smile people give when they're waiting for their turn to speak, but the kind that lingers because it's real. We began crossing paths more often, in the lobby, in the cafe across the street, at the occasional corporate mixer. I never planned it, but I found myself looking for her in the crowd. She listened in a way most people don't anymore. She remembered the little details, how I took my coffee, the book I'd been reading, the fact that I preferred walking over taking a car when I needed to think. Over time, those small moments became a lifeline. She never pushed me to talk about Teresa, but she didn't flinch when my answers hinted at the wreckage I'd been through. There's a kind of strength in someone who can stand beside you without trying to fix you, who understands that some scars aren't meant to disappear. While I was rebuilding my life, Teresa was building hers too, or at least the image of it. Photos of her and Harry began appearing in society pages and on industry blogs. They were always at the right parties, in the right clothes, with the right people. I ignored them at first, focusing on securing contracts and growing my company's reach, but no matter how much I tried, there was always someone eager to mention her name, to tell me how well she was doing, as if it was meant to be some kind of warning. It wasn't. If anything, it reminded me why I couldn't go back to being the man who had let her walk away without demanding the truth. I grew sharper, my meetings became shorter and more decisive. I started saying no to deals that didn't align with my vision. No matter how lucrative they seemed on the surface, the more I trusted my instincts, the more I saw results. Paula noticed the change before anyone else. "You've stopped looking over your shoulder," she said one day as we walked out of a meeting. I realized she was right. I wasn't waiting for the past to catch up to me anymore. I was too busy creating something it couldn't touch. The night of the gala, I didn't expect to see Teresa again. The event was a celebration of the city's most influential figures in business and philanthropy, the kind of event I now attended as a peer, not an outsider. Paula and I arrived together, her arm linked with mine, and I felt a quiet pride in knowing that I had reached this point without sacrificing who I was. And then there she was, across the room, looking almost exactly as she had the night we met. Only this time, I knew what that beauty cost. Our exchange had been brief, but in those few minutes, I could see the questions in her eyes. She wanted to know how I had gotten here without her. She wanted to know who Paula was, why I looked at her with the kind of steadiness I had never given Teresa in those last months. The truth was simple. I had learned that love wasn't about being dazzled, it was about being understood. Teresa had been my lesson, Paula was my answer. Still, seeing her stirred something I hadn't expected, not longing, not even anger, but a sense of finality. We had both made choices, and mine had led me to a place she could no longer reach. Later that evening, as Paula and I stood together listening to the keynote speech, I felt Teresa's gaze on us from across the room. I didn't turn to see it. Whatever bridge there had once been between us had burned the moment she walked out that door, and I had no interest in sifting through the ashes. 2 days after the gala, I was in my office reviewing the final draft of a major contract when my assistant knocked and entered without waiting for me to call her in. "Sir, there's Miss Teresa here to see you," she said carefully, like she was delivering bad news. I set my pen down. "Tell her I'm busy." "She said it's urgent," my assistant added. "And, she's already on her way up." Before I could respond, the elevator doors opened at the far end of the hall, and Teresa stepped out like she owned the floor. She was dressed for battle, tailored white suit, hair pinned perfectly, a faint smile playing at her lips. She didn't even glance at the receptionist or my assistant. "Marvin," she greeted me, as if we'd parted on pleasant terms. "I thought we should talk somewhere more private." "This isn't a good time," I said, rising from my chair but making no move to offer her a seat. Her eyes flicked over my desk, to the signed photographs of clients and the framed commendation I'd received earlier that year. "You've done well for yourself," she said, her voice layered with something I couldn't quite read, admiration or resentment, maybe both. "Why are you here, Teresa?" She set her purse down on the edge of my desk, as if marking territory. "I made a mistake," she said plainly. "Harry isn't who I thought he was. I thought he'd be a partner who lifted me up, but all he cares about is himself. He's been careless with our relationship, with his promises. And you think that's my concern because we were good together," she said quickly. "Because you were the one person who saw me for who I really am. I know I hurt you, I know I walked away when I shouldn't have, but I also know you're not the type to hold a grudge forever." I let out a short laugh. "You're wrong about that." Her smile faltered. "Marvin, I'm not here to argue. I want to fix things." "There's not anything to fix," I said. "You made a choice, and so did I." She glanced toward the window, regrouping. "I saw you with her," she said, voice quieter now. "Paula. She's nice, I guess. But she's not. She's exactly who I want her to be," I cut in. "And she doesn't need to be compared to you." For the first time, I saw the crack in her confidence deepen. She stood a little too still, like she was forcing herself not to react. Then she smoothed her expression and changed tactics. "I heard about the board meeting next week," she said. "You're pushing for the Ridgemont contract. That deal would put you miles ahead of your competitors, but Ridgemont's CEO has a complicated history with Harry. He might try to interfere. Then I'll deal with it." She took a step closer. "I could help you. I know the players in that circle. I know the angles they'll take. Let me prove I can be useful to you." I studied her for a long moment. "You think that's what this is about? Usefulness? Teresa, you burned every bridge between us the day you left. I don't need your help, and I certainly don't need your approval." Her lips tightened, but she didn't argue. Instead, she picked up her purse, gave me one last unreadable look, and walked out without another word. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. 3 days later, during a strategy session with my core team, Paula leaned in close and murmured, "You should know, Harry's here, in the lobby." I frowned. "Did you let him up?" She shook her head. "He's not here to see you, he's meeting with Ridgemont's legal counsel, and Teresa's with him." The words settled in my chest like ice. I ended the meeting early and went downstairs. Through the glass wall of the cafe across the lobby, I saw them, Harry laughing, Teresa leaning in like she was sharing a secret. Papers lay spread out between them, and from the angle I stood, I could see the Ridgemont logo printed on the top sheet. When they noticed me, Harry's grin widened. He didn't stand, didn't offer a hand. "Marvin," he said, like he'd just spotted an old friend. "Small world." "Not small enough," I replied. Teresa kept her gaze steady, her tone light. "We're just having coffee. No need to look so suspicious." I didn't answer. I simply looked at the documents on the table, then back at her. "You said Harry wasn't who you thought he was. Seems to me you know exactly who he is." "Business is business," she said softly. "And sometimes the best way to handle a threat is to keep it close." I walked away before I said something I'd regret. That evening, Paula came by my office after everyone else had left. "They're trying to undermine you," she said. "Harry's making promises he can't keep, and Teresa's backing him up. If Ridgemont believes them, your contract will stall." "I know," I said, leaning back in my chair, "and I know exactly what they're playing at. Teresa thinks she can stir doubt, make herself necessary to me again. She doesn't realize I've already seen this game before." Paula hesitated at the doorway. "Then you should be ready for the next move. People like her don't stop at one strike." She was right. 2 nights later, at a charity dinner Ridgemont's executives attended, I found out what she meant. Halfway through the evening, the CEO's wife approached me with a sympathetic smile. "I heard about the troubles in your personal life," she said, lowering her voice. "Teresa was telling me how difficult it's been for you since she left. You've been distracted, haven't you? These contracts must be hard to manage under such strain." I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I understood exactly what Teresa was doing, planting seeds of doubt in the minds of people who valued stability as much as profit. When I caught sight of her later, she was at Harry's side, her laughter perfectly timed to whatever story he was telling. She didn't look my way, but I knew she was aware of me. Every move she made tonight was calculated. On the ride home, Paula broke the silence. "You can't let her control the narrative." "I won't," I said, "but the best response isn't always immediate. Sometimes you wait until they're certain they've won before you take the ground out from under them." And that was the decision I made, not to confront her head-on, but to set the stage for her own undoing. The next morning, I reached out to an old contact, a journalist who specialized in corporate exposés. I didn't tell him what to write, only pointed him toward certain financial inconsistencies in Harry's recent ventures. If he followed the trail, it would lead to offshore accounts, inflated valuations, and investors with very good reasons to keep their distance. Meanwhile, I focused on strengthening my position with Ridgemont directly. Paula arranged a private meeting with their CFO, away from the noise of public events. We went over every clause of the proposal, every safeguard I'd built into the deal. By the time the meeting ended, the CFO had agreed to push the contract forward without interference. When Teresa heard about it, she came to see me again. This time, she didn't knock, she just stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I was trying to help you," she said, her tone sharper now. "By questioning my stability to potential partners?" I asked. Her eyes narrowed. "I know you still care about me, Marvin. You wouldn't be this defensive if you didn't." I stood, walked to the door, and opened it. "You're mistaking history for leverage. Don't." She didn't move right away, but eventually, she walked past me, her heels clicking against the floor like punctuation marks, to a sentence she thought wasn't over. I knew better. There's a certain heaviness that settles over you when you realize someone you once loved is now deliberately working against you. It's not just betrayal. Betrayal ends in a single moment. This was different. This was an ongoing, drawn-out erosion, the kind that seeps into every interaction, every sideways glance, every whispered conversation at the edge of a crowded room. I'd faced competition before, I'd been outbid, outmaneuvered, underestimated. But none of those opponents had the advantage of knowing me from the inside out. Teresa did. She knew which victories I valued, which losses I took personally, and she knew how to weaponize both. It was a strange contradiction. I didn't want her back, not for a second, yet I couldn't ignore her presence. Every time she appeared, there was a shift in the room. She carried herself as though she still had a stake in my life, as though some invisible thread tethered us despite my insistence that it had been cut. Paula saw it too. She didn't comment often, but when she did, it was with the kind of clarity that left no room for evasion. "You're letting her occupy too much of your mind," she told me one evening as we reviewed projections in my office. "I'm not thinking about her," I said. It was true in the literal sense. I wasn't sitting here dwelling on Teresa, but the tension in my shoulders betrayed the lie beneath it. "You're thinking about what she can do," Paula replied. "It's the same thing." That night, after she left, I stayed in the office long after the lights in the other departments had gone out. The city stretched beneath me in a scatter of lights, every window telling a story I'd never know. Somewhere out there, Teresa and Harry were planning their next move, deciding how best to force themselves back into relevance in my world. I hated that it mattered. There were moments when I caught myself wondering why Teresa had come back at all. Was it just to sabotage me, or was there some twisted part of her that couldn't stand seeing me succeed without her? Both answers were dangerous in their own ways. If it was sabotage, she'd keep escalating until she had nothing left to lose. If it was jealousy, she'd blur the line between personal and professional until the damage was too tangled to undo. In the middle of that uncertainty, Ridgemont's final decision loomed. The contract was nearly locked, but until the ink was dry, there was room for interference. I knew Teresa wouldn't stay idle. I knew Harry would take any opportunity to slow me down if it meant keeping his grip on the investors who still believed in him. The suspense was worse than any confrontation. At least with a direct attack, you could see it coming. This was like waiting in the dark for a sound you couldn't quite place, knowing it was close, knowing it was meant for you, but powerless to force it into the open. Paula became my anchor during those days. She had a way of grounding me without making me feel as if I needed rescuing. She didn't ask for reassurances, didn't demand I talk when I wasn't ready. Instead, she was simply there, steady, consistent, reliable. One afternoon, she found me staring at a set of reports without really seeing them. "You're somewhere else," she said. "I'm just thinking," I replied. "About her," Paula guessed. I didn't deny it. She's unpredictable. She'll push as far as she can, and when that doesn't work, she'll find a way to make herself the center of the story. "Then make sure you're the one telling it," Paula said. Her words stayed with me long after she left. She was right. If Teresa wanted to manipulate the narrative, I had to seize it before she could. But the question was how, and more importantly, when. The timing had to be perfect. Too soon, and she'd adapt. Too late, and she'd already done the damage. I needed her to believe she was ahead, that every whisper she planted was taking root. The weight of it followed me home at night. I'd find myself standing in the kitchen, staring at my phone, wondering if there'd be another chance encounter, another unannounced visit to my office. The silence between these moments was almost worse than the moments themselves. It left space for my mind to imagine what I wasn't seeing. Harry was less subtle than Teresa. His style was all bravado, all public shows of confidence meant to disguise the fractures underneath. I'd seen him at enough events to know when his smile was for the cameras and when it was meant to unsettle someone. Now, most of his smiles seemed directed at me. There were whispers about his business dealings even before my journalist contact started digging. Investors who had once spoken of him with certainty now hedged their words. Still, he had allies, and Teresa knew how to reinforce his image when it mattered. It was a performance, the two of them. She smoothed over his rough edges. He provided her with the stage she wanted. In a way, they deserved each other, but that didn't mean I was going to stand by and let them use my name as a stepping stone. One night, I found myself alone in the conference room, the city skyline a backdrop behind the floor-to-ceiling windows. My reflection stared back at me in the glass, not the man Teresa had left, but the man I'd become, stronger, colder, less willing to give anyone the benefit of the doubt. Yet there was a cost to that transformation. I felt it in the way I scanned every room for threats, in the way I measured my words even with people I trusted. The part of me that had once moved through the world without constant calculation was gone, replaced by someone who knew exactly how fragile success could be if you let the wrong person close. Paula was the exception. But even with her, I hesitated sometimes, not because I doubted her intentions, but because I feared what Teresa might try to twist. All it would take was one fabricated story, one half-truth dropped in the right ear, and Paula could find herself dragged into the chaos I was trying to keep contained. That thought kept me up more than once, not fear for myself, but for her. She hadn't signed up for this, yet she'd stepped into it without flinching. I owed it to her to see it through, to make sure Teresa's reach stopped here. The suspense wasn't just about the Ridgemont contract anymore, it was about proving, once and for all, that whatever power Teresa thought she still had over me was gone, and it had to be done in a way that left no room for her to come back again. Still, I couldn't ignore the memories that sometimes surfaced at inconvenient moments, a laugh shared over something trivial, the way she used to rest her head on my shoulder after a long day. They weren't longings, they were ghosts, and like all ghosts, they had a way of appearing when you least wanted them to. The difference now was that I didn't mistake those memories for something worth reviving. They were part of a life I'd already buried, no matter how much Teresa wanted to dig it up. As the week of the board meeting approached, the tension in the air became almost tangible. Everyone knew Ridgemont's decision would shift the balance of power. If I secured the contract, it would solidify my position in the industry for years to come. If I didn't, it wouldn't destroy me, but it would give Teresa and Harry exactly the narrative they wanted, that I'd risen too fast, that I couldn't hold my ground under pressure. The night before the meeting, I stayed in the office later than usual. Paula stopped by on her way out. "You're ready for this," she said simply. I nodded, but didn't speak. There was nothing left to prepare, only the waiting remained. After she left, I walked to the window and looked out at the city. Somewhere out there, Teresa was convincing herself she still had a place in my story. Tomorrow, she'd find out just how wrong she was. I went home that night knowing the stage was set, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without dreaming of her. The morning of the board meeting felt deceptively calm, like the stillness before a storm. I arrived early, not because I needed more preparation, but because I wanted to control the space before anyone else could influence it. The Ridgemont delegation was due in an hour, and every detail, from the seating arrangement to the order of presentations, had been calculated. Paula was already there, reviewing the digital presentation one last time. She glanced up when I entered. "You'll have them by the first slide," she said, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of anticipation. I gave her a brief nod. "And Teresa?" "She's here," Paula replied. "Came in with Harry. They're not on the guest list, but apparently one of the junior board members vouched for them." That was my first clue. Something had shifted. Teresa didn't insert herself into situations like this without a purpose. When the room began to fill, I noticed her immediately. A perfectly tailored navy dress, hair styled with precision, expression set to that neutral charm she used when she wanted people to lower their guard. Harry trailed behind, his smile a little too bright, his eyes scanning the room as if calculating the impact of every handshake. Ridgemont's CEO, Mark Russell, entered with his team. He was a man who valued order, and his handshake was the same as the first time we'd met, firm, exact, and measured. "Marvin," he said, "I'm looking forward to this." We began the meeting. My presentation unfolded exactly as planned: market data, projected returns, risk mitigation strategies. The numbers spoke for themselves, and I could see the Ridgemont team leaning in, engaged, weighing the possibilities. Paula's timing with the slides was flawless. Then, during the QA, one of the Ridgemont legal advisors, a man I'd met only briefly before, cleared his throat. "Before we proceed," he said, "we've been made aware of certain concerns regarding your stability in leadership, allegations of personal distractions impacting decision-making." Every head turned. I didn't move, didn't let the flicker of irritation show on my face. I already knew where this was coming from. "Could you clarify the source of these concerns?" I asked. The advisor hesitated. They were brought to our attention by individuals with prior professional and personal ties to you." Teresa didn't look at me, but I could feel her presence like a weight across the table. Harry was watching me openly, as if waiting for a visible crack in my composure. "I see," I said. "And do these individuals have verifiable evidence to support their claims?" Silence. Paula's voice broke it, calm but cutting. If I may, in my capacity as Director of Communications, I can confirm there's no validity to those claims. In fact, all performance metrics have shown an upward trajectory over the last fiscal year, even under increased operational demands. Russell glanced between us, then back to the advisor. If there's no evidence, we won't give weight to speculation. Let's proceed. I should have felt relief, but instead there was a shift in the air. Teresa's plan hadn't landed as she'd hoped, but she wasn't done. I saw it in the way she leaned toward Harry, murmuring something under her breath. We wrapped the formal agenda, and as the meeting shifted into informal networking, I moved to step away. That's when Harry intercepted me. "Strong presentation," he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But you know, Marvin, it's not always about numbers. Sometimes it's about trust, and trust is fragile." "Then you should be careful who you trust," I replied. Teresa appeared at his side, her tone deliberately light. "We just thought it was important Ridgemont got the full picture. After all, transparency is everything in partnerships." "You wouldn't recognize transparency if it stared you in the face," I said evenly. Her smile sharpened. "We'll see." That afternoon, the second blow landed. My journalist contact sent me a message. His investigation into Harry's business dealings had uncovered more than I'd expected, but someone had tipped Harry off. The financial records had been altered, just enough to create doubt about the authenticity of the original documents. Without the full chain of evidence, publishing would risk legal retaliation. It was a clever counterstrike. Harry might not be subtle, but he knew how to protect himself when cornered. And Teresa, she was skilled enough to anticipate my moves before I made them. That night, Paula and I reviewed everything in my apartment. She sat cross-legged on the sofa, scrolling through files on her tablet. "They're tightening their defenses. If we push now, it could backfire." "Which means we need to shift the field," I said. She looked up. "To what?" "To something they can't control." The opportunity came faster than I expected. 2 days later, Russell invited me to a private charity gala, a smaller, invitation-only event for high-level partners. The guest list was exclusive, but not so exclusive that Harry and Teresa couldn't maneuver their way in if they wanted to, and I had no doubt they would. Paula understood immediately. "You're going to make this public?" "Not in words," I said. "In perception. They've been planting doubts quietly. We'll answer loudly." On the night of the gala, I arrived with Paula on my arm. She wore a deep red gown that caught the light with every step, elegant without being ostentatious. We moved easily through the crowd, engaging in short, focused conversations, making it clear we belonged there. It didn't take long for Teresa to find us. She approached with Harry in tow, her smile fixed but her eyes sharp. "Marvin," she said, "I didn't expect to see you here." "You should expect me anywhere worth being," I replied. Harry laughed like we were sharing a private joke. "Still confident, I see." Russell joined us then, greeting Paula warmly before turning to me. "Marvin, the board's initial feedback on the proposal is strong. I think we're close to finalizing." I caught the flicker in Teresa's expression, a brief, unguarded moment where she realized her influence was slipping. Harry's jaw tightened. Russell glanced at them politely. "And you two are?" Teresa's voice was smooth. "Old friends of Marvin's. We've been offering some perspective on..." Russell didn't let her finish. "Well, I'm sure Marvin's capable of handling his own affairs. Excuse me." He moved away, and I watched the shift happen, not in words, but in the way the surrounding guests took their cues from him. Conversations pivoted toward me, toward Paula, leaving Teresa and Harry at the edge of the circle. The turning point wasn't just that they'd failed to undermine me in the meeting, it was that in this room, with these people, they were suddenly irrelevant. And irrelevance, for people like them, was worse than defeat. The night of the gala had already shifted the balance, but the real confrontation was yet to come. The Ridgemont contract was hours from being finalized, and Teresa knew it. That's why she was standing near the bar when I entered the main hall at the Continental Grand, her posture composed but her eyes fixed on me with deliberate intensity. The evening was meant to be a celebration, industry leaders, potential investors, and media outlets all in one space. Cameras flashed as guests arrived, interviews were being recorded at the far end of the room, and every movement was being observed by someone who mattered. Paula stayed at my side, calm as ever, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "She's going to try something here," she said quietly. "That's exactly what I'm counting on," I replied. We made our way through the crowd, exchanging handshakes and polite nods, until Teresa finally stepped forward, intercepting us before we could reach Russell. Harry was just behind her, a smug expression plastered on his face. "Marvin," Teresa said, her voice pitched so the surrounding guests could hear. "I was hoping to speak with you privately before the night ends." "This is as private as it needs to be," I said. She glanced at Paula briefly before returning her focus to me. "You've built something impressive, but you and I both know the foundation isn't as stable as you'd like people to believe. If Ridgemont knew the full picture, then they'd know I've delivered every result I promised," I interrupted. Harry stepped forward, his tone falsely casual. "Results can be temporary. Reputation, that's harder to rebuild once it's gone." The people nearest to us had quieted, their attention drawn to the exchange. Cameras shifted subtly in our direction. Teresa's smile was perfectly practiced. "I'm offering you a chance, Marvin. Let me help stabilize the perception before the contract is signed. It would benefit us both." "Us?" I repeated, letting the word hang for a moment. "There is no us, not personally, not professionally, and I think it's time everyone here understood exactly why." Her smile faltered, just slightly. "This isn't the place." "It's the perfect place," I said, raising my voice just enough for the nearby conversations to stop entirely. "Since you've been so eager to talk about reputations, let's put all the cards on the table." Paula moved slightly to the side, giving me space. I reached into my jacket and pulled out a thin folder. Inside were copies of financial records, not the altered ones Harry had cleaned, but originals sourced directly from a third-party audit, evidence of misappropriated funds and false reporting tied to his ventures. "These," I said, opening the folder for the benefit of the onlookers, "are the unaltered financial statements from Harry's last 3 investment rounds. They show exactly where the money went, and exactly how many investors were misled in the process, which, for anyone keeping track, is a criminal offense." Harry's face drained of color. "You can't prove those are real." "They've already been verified by 2 independent auditors," I cut in. "And as of an hour ago, the preliminary report was sent to the relevant authorities. I made sure the timeline was airtight before I walked into this room." Murmurs spread quickly. Russell had stepped closer, his expression unreadable, but he wasn't moving to stop me. Teresa's composure cracked, just enough for her voice to sharpen. "This is nothing but a distraction. You think humiliating Harry is going to make you look better?" I met her gaze without blinking. "No. But revealing the truth about the people trying to undermine me might stop them from dragging anyone else down with them." She took a step closer, lowering her voice but not enough to hide it from the microphones now pointed our way. "You've always needed to win, Marvin. It's the only way you know how to measure yourself, but the moment you make this about destroying me, you've already lost." I leaned in slightly. "I'm not destroying you, Teresa. You've been dismantling yourself since the day you walked out." Harry tried to speak again, but the sound of a phone vibrating interrupted him. It was Russell's assistant, holding out a device to him. "Sir, the regulators are on the line." Russell took the call a few steps away, his gaze never leaving Harry as he listened. When he returned, his tone was clipped. "Mr. Lewis, you and your counsel will need to address these matters immediately. Until then, Ridgemont will be suspending all discussions involving you or your affiliates." It landed like a hammer blow. Harry's mouth opened, then closed, his bravado gone. Teresa recovered faster, turning to the crowd with a tight smile. "We'll clear this up quickly. In the meantime, I suggest everyone reserve judgment." "I'm not finished," I said, drawing every eye back to me. I slid another document from the folder, this one a transcript of recorded messages Teresa had sent to one of my junior associates, messages in which she openly admitted to planting doubts about my leadership in Ridgemont's circles. Her voice filled the air as the audio played from a small speaker Paula had cued, every word sharp and unmistakable. If enough people believe Marvin's distracted, they'll hesitate to trust him with something this big. That's all we need, hesitation. The silence that followed was absolute. Teresa's face drained of color now. "You're twisting." "No," I said, "that's your voice, your words. And the only thing I've twisted is giving you the opportunity to explain it here, in front of the people you were trying to manipulate." Paula stepped forward then, her voice calm but resolute. "This is what transparency looks like, and it's the reason Marvin will be signing the Ridgemont contract without your interference." Russell didn't hesitate. We'll finalize the paperwork tomorrow. The reaction was immediate. Guests turned toward me with nods of approval, conversations resumed with a different energy, and the cameras that had been drawn by the tension now focused on the conclusion. Teresa stood frozen for a moment, her eyes flicking between me, Paula, and the exit. Harry muttered something under his breath and began moving toward the door, clearly eager to avoid further public attention. When she finally found her voice, it was quieter, stripped of the practiced edge she usually carried. "You think this changes everything?" "It already has," I said. I turned away from her and offered my arm to Paula, who took it without hesitation. Together, we walked toward Russell to discuss final details, leaving Teresa and Harry in the wake of their own unraveling. From the corner of my eye, I saw them make their exit, their retreat drawing far less attention than their arrival. In this room, at this moment, they were no longer players in the story. They were footnotes. As the evening wound down, Paula and I stepped out onto the balcony. The city lights stretched in every direction, the noise of the gala muffled behind the glass doors. For the first time in weeks, the tension in my chest eased. "You could have ended this quietly," she said. "I could have," I agreed, "but some lessons need to be learned in the open." She smiled faintly. "Think they'll learn it?" "Doesn't matter," I said. "I'm done giving them space in my life." Inside, I could hear the music change as the band began its final set. Tomorrow, the Ridgemont deal would be signed, and the last trace of Teresa and Harry's interference would be gone from my professional world. Personally, they'd been gone much longer. It had just taken tonight for everyone else to see it. I stayed on the balcony a moment longer, letting the cool air wash over me, before turning back toward the celebration. The future was waiting, and I wasn't going to waste another second of it on the past. The morning after the gala, the Ridgemont deal was finalized. The conference room was quiet except for the sound of pen on paper as Russell signed the final page and slid the document across the table to me. My signature felt heavier than ink. It was the weight of every obstacle cleared, every trap dismantled, every attempt to undermine me crushed under its own failure. "Congratulations," Russell said, standing to shake my hand. "You've earned this." Paula was there, her presence steady beside me, and I caught the faintest smile when she saw the completed contract. She'd been with me through each twist, and in her eyes was the knowledge that this was more than a business victory. By midday, the news had broken. Industry publications announced the deal, analysts praised the strategy, and the market responded exactly as I'd hoped. My name was trending in the right circles, not because of gossip or speculation, but because of results. And somewhere in the background, I knew Teresa was watching. Harry's situation worsened quickly. The financial records I'd revealed at the gala had prompted formal inquiries. Investors pulled their support, contracts evaporated, and those who had once fought to be seen at his side now avoided him entirely. He wasn't just losing business, he was losing the image that had kept him afloat. Teresa tried to distance herself from him, but the association was too public, too fresh. Her name was mentioned in every article covering his collapse. Whatever circles she'd once dominated closed their doors, quietly and decisively. I didn't need to reach out or gloat. My silence did the work for me. Paula and I returned to work, the Ridgemont project immediately taking priority. The office felt lighter, the undercurrent of tension gone. For the first time in months, I could focus entirely on building without looking over my shoulder. Still, closure has a way of testing you. 2 weeks after the deal closed, my assistant buzzed me. "Teresa is here, she says it's important." I considered refusing, but something in me wanted the final word, not for her, but for myself. "Send her in." She entered without hesitation, dressed simply this time, no calculated elegance, no polished mask. Her eyes lingered on the contract framed on the wall before settling on me. "You did it," she said. "I told you I would." For a moment, she didn't speak. Then, "I was wrong about a lot of things, about you, about what I wanted." "That's not my problem anymore," I replied. She exhaled slowly. "I'm leaving the city. There's nothing for me here now. I just thought I owed you the truth before I go." I waited, giving her nothing. "Harry's finished," she admitted. "The people who still take his calls only do it to laugh at him, and me? I'm just the woman who backed the wrong man. That's all anyone sees now." There was no satisfaction in her voice, no trace of the woman who had stood in my office months ago, certain she could manipulate the outcome. "You built that reputation yourself," I said. "You'll have to live with it." She gave a faint, humorless smile. "I already am." She turned toward the door, then paused. "Paula's good for you. Don't make the same mistakes I did." And then she was gone. When the door closed, I realized I felt no anger, no lingering resentment. She was simply irrelevant. The space she'd once occupied in my life had been filled with something better, something real. That evening, Paula and I celebrated. Not with champagne and noise, but with quiet, a dinner at a small restaurant where no one cared who we were, where the conversation was ours alone. "I saw her today," I told Paula between courses. She didn't look surprised. "And?" "She's leaving." Paula studied me for a moment. "Does that feel like an ending?" "It feels like the truth," I said. "And the truth is, I don't care where she goes." Paula smiled, not out of triumph, but out of understanding. "Good, because we have better things ahead." In the weeks that followed, Ridgemont's partnership opened doors I'd once only imagined. New clients came not just because of the deal, but because of the reputation it had cemented. Decisive, resilient, unshakable. Paula and I traveled for meetings, spoke at conferences, and began planning expansions that would have seemed too ambitious a year ago. Occasionally, I'd hear whispers about Harry's decline, lawsuits, unpaid debts, desperate pitches no one accepted. Teresa's name surfaced less and less until it was absent entirely. They had become what they feared most, forgotten. One night, standing on the balcony of my apartment, city lights stretching to the horizon, I thought about how far I'd come since the day Teresa walked out with her suitcase. I remembered the weight of her absence, the way I'd thrown myself into work to avoid feeling the loss. Back then, I hadn't known it was the beginning of something better. Now, I could see it clearly. Her leaving had forced me to rebuild, but I'd built stronger. Her attempts to undermine me had sharpened my focus. And when she came back, trying to reclaim a place she no longer deserved, I'd shown her, and everyone else, that the door was closed for good. Paula stepped out onto the balcony beside me, handing me a glass. "To what's next?" she said. "To what's ours," I replied. We clinked glass. Says, the sound small against the hum of the city, but it carried more weight than any victory speech. Because the real victory wasn't the contract or the public exposure of Teresa and Harry, it was knowing I'd taken every piece of what they'd tried to use against me and turned it into something they could never touch. And that was something no one could take away.